And this is what so many of us are losing in our modern busy lives with our massive to-do list. Nature can bring us to this place, and this yoga practice can bring us to this place. And once we visit that place where we're still, we're expansive, we're opening, we're not so me concentrated, but we start to sense the greater we just start to feel more open, more connected to those around us. And therefore, after we've done that practice, we're going to be operating from a different space than we did beforehand.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. I'm Brett Larkin, and welcome back to the Sivana Podcast. I want to thank you so much for being here and for all the love you give the show. I love connecting with you and, of course, getting your honest feedback and reviews. So if you haven't taken a moment to give us a rating on iTunes, please take a second to do that now, even if iTunes isn't how you usually listen to the show. This truly does make a difference and helps get this information in front of more people like you who are looking to deepen their yoga, meditation, practice at home, and incorporate natural healing into their life. So on the topic of deepening our yoga and meditation practice, I couldn't be more excited to share today's guest with you, Kia Miller, the founder of Radiant Body Yoga. Kia is one of my personal favorite teachers. Radiant Body Yoga is a holistic approach to yoga that she's developed. It has its roots in the ancient practice of Kundalini Yoga and Tantric traditions. It encompasses and unites the transformational possibilities of Kundalini, the challenging technical precision of Ashtanga and Iyengar, and the power of prayer, mantra, and meditation. So if you're interested in any of those things, you definitely want to stay tuned. Kia, thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question, because I just want to make sure all the listeners are on the same page, would you mind telling us what Kundalini Yoga is and how it's different from Hatha or Vinyasa-style practice that people might be familiar with?
Well, yes, it's a big question, by the way.
I know, I'm jumping right in.
Yeah. You know, depending on what kind of Kundalini class you go into, but generally speaking, a Kundalini class is going to be focused on the pranic body, on stimulating, guiding, and balancing our energy, our vitality. It's usually, in the way that I teach it, it's a series of postures that are dynamic with little breaks in between. And what happens through the course of the Kriya is that the energy is enlivened and guided in a particular way that each Kriya has a specific, target, if you like. And so some of them are really about just opening you up to a greater perception, vision, awareness of yourself. Some of them really send a lot of energy towards particular organs or particular areas of the body. But the overall goal really being to practice in such a way that our attention is being brought into our multi-dimensional nature as humans. So really to start to create that deep synchronization of our experience of ourselves as physical beings, energetic beings, mental beings, spiritual beings, so that we start to create a deeper and deeper connection with ourselves, with our personal power, with our creativity, with that deep sense of love and compassion. So that's what I would say. Classes, incorporate movement, breath, mantra, prayer, all kinds of, it's a lot.
It is a lot. And if you're listening and you're trying to visualize this at home, one of the ways I think to describe Kundalini, if you're trying to think like, well, how is this different? It's like you're not so much doing in traditional Kundalini, because you're going to tell us about radiant body yoga as well. But in traditional Kundalini, it's less sort of sun salutes and chaturanga and flowing through postures. And it's more like he's saying these prescriptive type of exercises and often repetitive movements like squatting up and down, or twisting left to right, left to right, left to right. So it could look very different from the yoga that you're used to if you've only been exposed to Hatha or Vinyasa. Do you think that description's accurate, Kia?
That's a beautiful description. Well done. I'm in the midst of a 200-hour teacher training right now. So, I've been really teaching to all the different depth, but I love the clarity of your answer there. Yeah, so the practice is really designed, it's the perfect practice for this modern age because it's designed to help us to unhook from all the areas that we're obsessed, caught up, overly busy. It's such a powerful practice that it helps us to cut through our stress and kind of arrive at a more balanced and easeful state really very quickly. Sometimes in as little as 3 minutes, you create a profound enough shift through a particular breath and exercise that you really can get a deeper grip on yourself, when you just consider how caught up so many of us are because our lives are demanding so much of us.
You're tapping into something that I've been so excited to talk to you about because I agree. And if you're listening and you haven't tried Kundalini Yoga, I really hope you will after listening to this podcast because it's true. There's just 3 minutes of some of these breathing techniques and repetitive Kundalini movements we're talking to can so drastically shift your energy and really work on the pranic body, the energetic body, which Kia will tell us more about. But Kia, one of the things I found is that so many people, that Yogi Bhajan, who's the founder of Kundalini Yoga, really designed it for householders, right? He designed it for normal people to be able to do. And as you're saying, it fits so perfectly with this modern age and the stress of daily life. However, I think a lot of people are intimidated by Kundalini Yoga because there is the chanting. And, there's like this thing of wearing all white, and sometimes the teacher's wearing a turban. And so even though it's so accessible and was designed for the average person, I think a lot of times the average person can be intimidated or a little bit scared off, and somehow like Ashtanga or some of these other styles might seem more accessible. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly it. I think just the way that it's traditionally presented can be off-putting for somebody just walking in off the street. And so therefore, I think those of us who teach it, really our responsibility is to make it more accessible and to describe to people what is about to happen and to help them understand the process that they're going through. And, and I think to pick practices and present it in such a way that you really can give somebody an experience. Because once you've had the kind of experience delivered through a Kundalini Yoga class, then you really get it. I didn't get it for a while when I first went, but I kept going because I loved the teacher. But then when I had that kind of physical experience where I did a strong navel kriya and right at the little rest after doing a very powerful belly exercise with breath, I had this profound sense of stillness wash all over my body and a profound sense of peace and in connection that, that has never left me. It was just that moment of self-recognition that in all the Ashtanga, in all the Vinyasa classes I'd done, even though I'd created a really good relationship with my physical body and opened and strengthened, I hadn't yet tapped into this dimension of practice that comes through Kundalini Yoga. Or any of this style of practice. And to me, that was the beginning of a new level of ritual unfolding and a new level of recognition that there was a lot more possible for me in this life than I had thought previously. And I think that's the beauty of this practice, that when you start to have these profound shifts of energy, you realize that we're only as limited as we believe we are limited. And when you start to tap into this next level of creative energy and potential, then you can start to vision and shift and really start to live the life of your dreams. I think that's what we're being called upon to do at this time. And we look around and we see how disturbed the greater world is. It's that sense of, okay, I don't want to keep adding to this kind of disturbance and chaos. How can I draw in? How can I start to change my inner experience and world so that I'm not participating in that vibration out there anymore? I'm actually creating something that's elevated, that has more potential. And then through doing that, I'm inviting those around me into that space, and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit of what I see, the magic, the potential of this practice. Of course, there is that barrier to entry. So I just ask people, when you come into a Kundalini yoga class, come in with the most open mind you can. Know you're going to do some weird stuff. You can laugh about it with your friends afterwards. That's fine. But just give yourself the really good, honest opportunity, and then go your own experience, because nobody's telling you what to do or what to feel. These are just a bunch of techniques that are designed to help you access deeper dimensions of you.
Well, one of the things I love so much about your teaching, Kia, is that you make it so accessible, because I think, as you said, you had some experiences with Kundalini early on that maybe didn't jive with you so well. And those of you who also listen to my personal podcast, I have a podcast that is about my very first, or not my very first, but some of my early experiences with Kundalini, which were very negative because just so much energy was released so quickly and no one really explained to me what was going on. And it really wasn't until years and years later that I found you and other teachers that made the practice and really explained what was happening in terms that I could understand, that all of a sudden it went from being something that was very frightening and overpowering and negative to like, oh my gosh, this is an opening. And I think this is a quote of yours, Kia, one of my favorites, but you say that your Vinyasa practice is really for your body, but your Kundalini practice is really for your, meaning your physical body, and your Kundalini practice is really for your pranic, your energetic body. So listeners who are looking to go deeper into that realm, this is so powerful. And as Kia said, you can keep experimenting and just keep an open mind and try to find the right teacher, and to try to give people some practical tips today about how all of this works. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about, because you talked about the shift, right, that can happen energetically in Kundalini Yoga. Talk to us about this concept of the Aquarian Age, because I think that's a concept that gets thrown around that people are confused about, right? We're practicing Kundalini to come into the Aquarian Age. And what does that really mean? And how does it coincide with all this stress that we're maybe feeling in our day-to-day lives right now?
Oh, I know, isn't it funny? These terms are thrown around, and for years I really disliked the term, the Aquarian Age. It sounded so cosmic and so ungrounded, and I was also like, well, what does that really even mean? Okay, there's an astrological age shift from the Piscean Age to the Aquarian Age. So then I sort of broke it down more into just seeing the general shift. What Yogi Bhajan said about the Aquarian Age is it's this age of information that we're in now, where, as we know, through Guru Google, we can pretty much dial in anything that we want to know about, and all the information is right there at our fingertips. And actually, perhaps not on the news front, but on, if you're looking up a lot of things, you can get some very accurate information on Google. And so information is not the issue anymore, but what is the issue is there's so much of it. How do we wade through it all? How do we know what's right for us? And because we have this information coming at us from all angles, we're all connected to our devices like they're an extension of our being. And so for me, the Aquarian Age is coming into this age of information. The past age, the Piscean Age, as Yogi Bhajan put it, it was an age of if you had knowledge, you had power. So if you wanted to go study yoga, you had to go thousands of miles to some remote place and study with some remote person. And it was, a step-by-step process. But in this day and age, all the information is here. How do I sift through it? And so in order to do that, I kind of have to upgrade my physical system. And what I'm watching now is with all the millennials, when they come into class, it's amazing. I see that these young people who, they're just very open. And what's taken me 25, 30 years to really grasp and understand and integrate, they're integrating in moments. And it's fascinating to see. So I see we're just going into this age where there's a lot that's possible right now. We're seeing a certain aspect of our world start to crumble around us a little bit on the political sphere. And we're starting to see, perhaps we're starting to glimpse what's not working there, and coming into a deeper connection with ourselves through these practices to start to actualize the world that in our heart of hearts, all of us have this vision of a certain kind of world that's not necessarily what we're experiencing right now. We may experience a lot of it in our day-to-day lives, but on a mass level. I know this is not exactly answering your question, but it's what's coming up for me in the moment. So I feel like this Aquarian age is about us really starting to take self-responsibility on the multitude of levels that needs to happen so that we unhook from negative relationships, from stagnation in job, from negative thinking, from all of the ways that we're dissipating and just generally not using our energy optimally. And this is our opportunity. Come back to yourself. Do practices that remind you of your own divinity, of your own potential, and then start to watch how your life is magically changes from there. You get into a flow. Things become more effortless. And we start to access this sense of really living to what is true for us. I believe this whole age we're in right now, that this is what's possible. We can really unhook from being enslaved by so many of the things that our ancestors were enslaved by, whether it's the 9-to-5 job or old, outmoded cultural ways of being, societal ways of being. It's like, let's just come back to home base, start an inner revolution, if you like, of cultivating energy and vitality and deep presence and working with our energy in such a way that we go from a more dense state of consciousness where we're getting caught in old patterns, but we're actually, rather than that, let's rise ourselves up through these practices and expand and open to envisioning and living and creating a world where there's a lot more light and balance reflected in the collective consciousness. That's a long answer.
No, I love it. I love it. I think for listeners at home, this idea of, right now we are in this period of information overload, and to be able to tune inward and go inward, which I feel all yoga is about. But you said something that I think we can really latch onto, which is changing our patterns. Whether it's the pattern to always look at Guru Google, as you said, which is my new favorite term, by the way, instead of maybe meditating or going inward. But for people who want to really shift the patterns of their mind, or what they might know of as a samskara or something like that from the Yoga Sutras. All yoga helps us do this, but there's something about Kundalini and the way it's so prescriptive with these repetitive movements and the way Yogi Bhajan designed it, that I think if you want to change a thought pattern or make a big shift in your life or gain more confidence or overcome a fear, that the prescriptive sort of technical nature of Kundalini is insanely powerful. First of all, do you agree? And can you describe for listeners a little bit more about the science behind Kundalini? Because I think it's like, why are we doing, 26 frog squats, or why do I have to twist left and right, breathing in this particular pattern for, 6 minutes. And I try to encourage people to discover that, no, this isn't random. Yogi Bhajan really understood the different nadis or energy channels in the body, and that these are all stimulating particular energy points. But you can talk so much better to this than I can. So tell us.
Yes, to everything that you just said. And again, I'm kind of deep in this. We've been having some very big philosophical discussions here in this teacher training, so forgive me if I go off every now and again. But back to the practicalities. Yes, the Kriyas, the meditations, the pranayams, they're very prescriptive. What they do is, rather than doing a yoga practice that's so focused on the physical body, what the Kriyas do is you move your physical body in these dynamic movements. Sometimes they're still, but the purpose of that is not for the physical body itself. It's that we use the physical body, and sometimes with a breath in it, as a way to awaken energy. Because as the yogis discerned, we're not just this physical body. There's different sort of dimensions, if you like, sheaths of our being. We're physical, but we're also energetic. And we have the mental body, and then we have sort of underlying kind of subtlety where the witness consciousness lives, where we get to experience and witness our life and our being from there. So what we do in the Kundalini Yoga is we do a specific practice so that we can awaken energy. Once you've awakened energy, now you've given yourself the vitality, the life force, if you like, to begin to break through patterns. So, for example, say the Kriya is about creative energy, about helping us to access that creative part of ourselves. I know many people experience writer's block and similar kind of blocks on their creativity. Well, yoga says, that the creative center, the raw creative center is the second chakra down in the pelvis. The higher creative center is the throat. So you have a Kriya that goes down, does a bunch of belly work, which awakens energy down in the lower body. That gives us access to like our raw creative energy, if you like. And then a sequence of postures that gently guides it along the spine, through the heart center, up to the throat. That would be an example of how a class is sequenced to create a certain effect. So then all that energy is at the throat, and then maybe you do some chanting, some mantra practice that really helps to solidify and integrate the energy around the throat. And if you do that practice regularly, you start to change your own patterning in your body, and you start to energize these areas that we want to have a greater access to. So that's an example, one example of what we might do in a Kundalini practice. So this is why it feels more prescriptive, more specific. Some of the Kriyas are just more overall balance, and in that you're looking just to create that place where in between each of these exercises that you do, you experience a deep state of peace, expansiveness, silence, that kind of dynamic silence that's sort of connected to feeling still. And this is what so many of us are losing in our modern busy lives with our massive to-do list. Nature can bring us to this place, and this yoga practice can bring us to this place. And once we visit that place where we're still, we're expansive, we're opening, we're not so me concentrated, but we start to sense the greater we just start to feel more open, more connected to those around us. And therefore, after we've done that practice, we're going to be operating from a different space than we did beforehand. And this is where the practice has becomes so potent in our lives as householders, as you mentioned earlier. Householders meaning we have families, we work, we're very engaged in the world. We're not in a cave doing some remote practice so that we can, dissolve into some really sublime states of consciousness. What we're looking to do is do a practice in the day that helps us to awaken a little bit more to that place that I know in our heart of hearts, we all want to be accessing and living from. Loving kindness, patience, compassion, tolerance, neutrality in our mind, so that when chaos happens around us at our workplace, at our home, in our communities, we're able to operate and be a very grounding, neutral, loving. Then I feel like we're really living to our potential if we can hold that space. So there's one reason why I feel like doing like a kriya a day, a practice a day, that's like the medicine that helps lift you up out of a vibration of stress or overwhelm or even depression, which many of us feel, or anxiety. It helps to rebalance you so that when you go out in the world, you can begin to live more optimally. That's the purpose of this yoga, that makes it something that's applicable to every day. And then when you get deeper into the practice, you realize that once you get enough of these tools, these little practices in your toolbox, then, when you hit a depressed phase, you know which tool to pull out to use in that moment. You go into an anxious, overstressed space. You know exactly the tool that will help to bring you back to balance. And when we can begin to live from this place and use these tools in this way, then there's just no telling what individually and collectively we can be creating. That's very exciting to me.
This podcast was brought to you by SivanaSpirit.com. In ancient Indian mythology, and even today, chakras are considered to be the most important energy centers in the body. It's been said that when all 7 energy points are aligned, deep spiritual development occurs. When the chakras come into balance, they bring harmony, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. In fact, sometimes when we feel off, it's really just these energy points that need to be worked on. Celebrate the 7 chakras with a beautiful must-have chakra tank. Printed down the spine with sophisticated metallic ink, the chakras are represented by unique hand-drawn symbols. You can add a pop to your style with elegance, all while reminding yourself of the deeper spiritual truth of our world. Use the exclusive discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. Do you want a $25 gift card from SivanaSpirit.com completely for free? It's super easy. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey with 7 short questions, and then you'll be emailed your gift card to use whenever you're ready. This survey will help us better understand the most important thing in the world, you. Go to SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey today and claim your reward. Again, that's SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey. I agree. And there's something I want to make sure we don't gloss over here, which is that we're talking about how this practice can really help us find this profound sense of stillness, be an anchor for our families and our children and our loved ones. However, I want to ask you about or have you speak to the fact that a lot of these kriyas, and listeners, if you don't know what a kriya is, it's just a series of postures, right? That's what it's called in Kundalini, are challenging or triggering, right? So while you might feel this great sense of stillness after, you might go into a Kundalini class and they're asking you to hold your arms up above your head for 5 minutes and do breath of fire. And in that moment of doing that work, you maybe feel angry. Or I know, like my early experience with Kundalini Yoga, I felt insane anger towards the teacher, towards myself. And then when you get to stop doing it, you feel great. And it's like everything just shifts. But Is that a typical experience? And can you talk to that a little bit? Because one of the big breakthroughs I thought I had was that when I fully understood that Kundalini Yoga is in some ways designed to trigger you, right? And then once you know that, but tell our listeners more about this, because I think this is how people get a little maybe frustrated or intimidated by the Kundalini practice at first.
Well, first of all, I just want to recognize you for a moment, and to all of you listeners out there who have tuned into Brett's podcast, well done, because you've got such a beautiful, sincere seeker and someone who's so very clear, and I really appreciate your clarity and the way that you are sharing your experience with people. So thank you for that. And you're right on this. I've been speaking so much about the place that you arrive to when you've been practicing for a while. Brett is exactly right that what's happening here is, in the beginning, whatever you've been suppressing, whatever needs to be cleansed and moved out of you, particularly on the emotional level, that's going to happen. I too was frustrated and angry in a lot of my earlier classes because it was an emotion that I'd been suppressing for a long time. I didn't want to show anger to people. I wanted to be nice. I didn't want to, and so therefore when I suppressed it, I became frustrated. And then I was frustrated and angry with the teacher. And then I went through a phase where I got very emotional and sad. And so there was then a layer of sadness that needed to come through. And in any one Kundalini class, the person on your right might be feeling blissful and ecstatic and laughing. And the person on your left might be really angry and frustrated, and you can feel the daggers they're emanating at people around them. And then you might be feeling, sad and emotional. So all depending on what you've been holding, what emotional patterns particularly you've been suppressing, that stuff all gets to move up and out. And that's why I believe it's such a powerful practice. Yogi Bhajan said, as teachers, we have to poke, provoke, confront, and then elevate students. As a practitioner, we get poked, we get provoked, our ego gets confronted, where we've been holding on gets poked and confronted, and we have to release. And what I say to people is, when you feel an intense emotion, try not to latch a story onto it. Just allow it to be, and then it'll just pass through you, and you'll feel a lot lighter and a lot more cleansed later. Maybe not right after class, maybe not the next day, but then you start to feel a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. So well said, because it really does, it does work on the cleansing of the emotional body. And so many of us, this is what makes us sick, when we don't process our emotions and we don't move that level of stagnation and old patterning. And we learn a lot of this emotional response stuff from our families. So be patient with yourself and understand that it's a process to go through. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. That's what I'm here to say. If you can just be patient with yourself, with the practice, and give it a shot, there's an incredible light and ease and elevated way of being that's underneath all of those layers.
I absolutely love what you're saying about the poke and provoke, because I think now we're really talking about the crux of how Kundalini is different from maybe your Vinyasa practice, right? Because Vinyasa, you're flowing, and your Vinyasa teachers, I mean, maybe they're having you hold a chair pose for a couple breaths, but they're not, it's not designed to sort of I think of poking someone with a little fire stick, right? And Kundalini is just it's doing that right away. And because we have you, and I'm so excited for you to share with people, what tips do you have for folks? Because I think, as we're sharing our experiences even with one another as teachers, it's very common to struggle at the beginning and to have maybe these intense emotions of anger, sadness, fear when you're doing some of these kriyas, especially the ones that are physically challenging. I know for me, ones where I have my arms above my head and that kind of thing. What's your practical tips for folks when they're feeling those emotions and they're I have to put my arms down? I know even for me, studying with Gurmukh recently, we did a rebirthing Kriya, and it was 25 minutes or 30 minutes. And I had to put my arms down. I've grown so much in mental strength and physical strength, but I just couldn't do it. And I was asking some of my friends in the training with me after, I was like, did you manage to keep your arms up the whole time? How did you do it? And I'm just curious, like, what do you tell students where, like, if they have to take a break, what's the best thing to do and focus on during that time that they do take a break? And just sort of the best way to cope with the challenges.
Yes, I know that Kriya you were doing, the ghost Kriya.
Oh, it was very challenging for me.
Very challenging. Okay, so let's use that as an example. You're being asked to move your arms above your head for 20 odd minutes. It's very challenging. So what happens is ultimately, yes, you may reach muscle fatigue, but for most of us, the muscle fatigue is the very last of the obstacles. What actually gets in our way is our mind. I always remember when I did my Kundalini teacher training, there was a 14-year-old girl called Arazu in the class. She's now a wonderful Kundalini teacher. And we went to this thing called White Tantric Yoga over summer solstice, where it's 2,500 people gathering, and we do these long kriyas for long periods of time. And we had to hold our arms. If you can imagine making a triangle by putting the tips of your thumbs together and then the tips of your index fingers together and your palms like facing forward. And then you put that above your head. So basically you've got your arms above your head and you're being asked to hold them up there for 62 minutes. And you think, well, why would I ever do that? You've got to be nuts. And you're crazy and this is going to hurt my arm, I'm going to do nervous system damage, I'm going to do this. You see how the mind creates so many stories. So I have my arms up there, and every now and again I just let my thumbs sink down onto the crown of my head and I take a break. Of course, the moment you take a break, in that moment you feel relief, and then you lift your arms back up and you're right back where you were. But at the end of it all, the 62 minutes, the Arazu came over and she was like, hey, how was that? All bright and bubbly. And I was like, well, that kind of sucked. and she was laughing. And I was like, well, how was it for you? She was like, great. I was like, well, didn't you put your arms down? She was like, no. Like, no. Well, did you? and I was like, well, how did you not put your arms down? And she said, well, I didn't think it was an option. And it was fascinating to me because I was like, I had decided going in that it was impossible. And so the power of the mind is such that I limited myself immediately. Here's this 14-year-old who absolutely did the entire thing. That was revelatory to me. So what I say to people is that what limits us mostly is the mind. We get stuck in some mind pattern that is it's overriding and it's diminishing your power and your potential in that moment to hold it. So what we do so much in these kriyas is you take your mind off of the problem and you focus it somewhere else. Maybe you're chanting a mantra. If you just take it away from the big sensations you feel, and then what you notice is the sensations may diminish and you're happy again for a wee while. And then you were like, oh, I remember my arms hurt. And now you're back in the arms again. And okay, well, you're focusing there and now they hurt. So there is, once you get skilled at it, there's that dance. Where you place your mind and your attention is what takes you through. Doing a practice like that with the arms up above the head, and it's a very extreme one, for that long a period of time, it draws so much energy up to the higher centers. And the people, when I last taught that Kriya, for a week afterwards, everyone felt elevated and expanded and different. That's an extreme example. Then in class, if I'm leading someone in class, they've never done this before. It's overwhelming. Maybe, we're having you circle your arms out to the sides for 3 minutes or even 5 minutes. I mean, that's a lot of time. So what I say to people is, go within what feels manageable to you and start to build your confidence. And when you take a break, just take a break, be still, be calm, be with your breath. Most important, love yourself when you take a break. Recognize a moment of self-care. So you're not using it as an opportunity to beat yourself up. Oh, I'm bad. I'll never do this. Here I am. I'm failing again. Look at everyone around me. They're doing it, but I'm not. Rather than go there, you just like, okay, going to take a break. Take a few breaths, jump back in, try it again, and keep going. On those days where you got a little bit more fire in you, push your edge, try it. Tell yourself at the beginning, I'm going to do this. And just explore and see what is possible. And again, if you meet that edge and you need to bring your arms down, you forgive yourself, you bless yourself, you're like, wow, I'm really doing the best I can today. And you keep going. And this is why the practice is so provocative, because you're asked to do very challenging things and really meet your ego structure, really meet the places that you've limited yourself, and you're invited to go further. The beauty of doing it in a group is that the group energy inspires you. And if you see somebody in front of you that, maybe you consider yourself really strong, and then you see somebody in front of you that you might look at and not consider very strong, but wow, they're really doing that. And you get to understand that ultimately it's not about physical strength here. It's about it's about your ability to direct your mind. And because once you get the energy flowing through these exercises, the energy takes over and sustains it. So here's how we go beyond our limiting belief, and we start to do the sincere mental training that's necessary if we want to walk through the world and not be reacting to everything all the time. But if we want to walk through the world and be neutral and be able to take a blow from some angle, from somewhere, and just not let it ruin your day or topple you over. It's like, you know yourself, you know your capacity at a different level, so people just can't bother you in the same way. You can have more compassion for them, etc.
I need to ask you now something that I've wanted to ask for so long, because I think we're talking about the challenge and being able to mentally direct your energy. And I know for me, one of the things that's been so helpful, and one of the things I really appreciate about your teaching, is I really love to know what's coming, right? How long is something, right? So if you tell me it's going to be 61 minutes, I'm much better able to prepare, or tell me it's going to be 25 minutes, like having that expectation, and then, letting the student know, we're halfway there, or we have 2 minutes left or so, is for me personally so comforting and helpful to really know. However, I recently got feedback from a student of mine who said that we're close friends, but she said that she found, when I was teaching in that same style, that she found that distracting, because she was so good at like getting her mind totally focused on her breath, or focused on the mantra, or out of the pain, let's call it in quotes, right? That having those sort of updates or check-ins was actually taking her out of her zone. And it made me fascinated about, both as a student and, I'm sure some of our listeners are teachers as well. What are your thoughts on that? And is it like cheating to like give people those time updates and encouragement? And are you potentially distracting or taking away something from other students?
I think it's simply a personal preference. Some people, especially beginners, you need to tell them how long they have to go. And then you get to the point, I think, it's just a preference, really. I can go either way. But what I do notice is if I've been doing something for a really long time and then I just know there's 2 minutes left, those 2 minutes can seem as long as the other 45 minutes or whatever. That's an exaggeration, if it would be 45 minutes. But so I think it goes either way. I like to tell people, just to keep them to keep them involved. But I understand how that could be irritating to some people who are in the zone, because as I said, once you hear the time, then suddenly all you're focusing on is the time. And we're working ultimately to move our minds out of that realm of how much time is this? How much time is this? The more we ask that, the more excruciating it is. It's that surrender on that level and just focusing and being in the moment of doing that helps us to sustain through. So ultimately, for your friend, for example, it's just her developing the ability, if somebody tells her how long to go, just to stay focused.
There's nothing more essential to a gemstone collection than rose quartz, and SivanaSpirit.com has a beautiful selection you'll absolutely love. Use the code PODCAST30 at checkout for 30% off, and we promise you and your heart will be thankful. Yeah, and she can use that work. And for someone else, I feel like if you don't say anything, I know a lot of times I feel abandoned by the teacher, right? And you want that comfort. I want to ask you now just a couple practical questions, because I think we have the mutual goal that at the end of this podcast, someone who maybe hasn't tried Kundalini or maybe even had a negative experience would be excited to try it again. So these are some of the things that really mystified me at the beginning. And I was wondering if you could give us just like quick answers to some of these common questions that I think a lot of times people are afraid to ask. So I thought it'd be great to air them on the podcast for listeners. And then of course, I want us to close with you telling us more about radiant body yoga and your kind of hybrid style of Kundalini specifically. The first one was just, why white? Why are we wearing white when we practice Kundalini? And do you have to wear white?
You don't have to wear white to practice Kundalini. As teachers, we're asked to wear white. As a color, white expands the auric field, so it helps you to be brighter, literally brighter. We cover our head because it helps to contain the energy, and that's it. It's just really simple. As a practitioner, you choose to wear not white or not wear white. It really, it doesn't matter. The reason Yogi Bhajan said is that if you put white on, it expands your aura. It expands that kind of energetic field around you, gives you a little more projection and protection.
And talk a little more about the headpiece or the turban, because I know you mentioned it contains the energy, but can you be a little more specific for us there? For example, I feel like I've maybe heard that it helps stimulate the third eye, or it's even stimulating pressure points, very specific pressure points around the sort of hairline and head, but you tell me.
Yeah, in the simplest terms, it's there just to help contain energy. I think for most modern day practitioners, we're not wearing a turban. If you were to wear a turban, in the style of the Sikhs, then you would be accessing those pressure points on your head. But if you're someone like me, I wear a silk or a cotton scarf around my head, then I'm doing it. I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. I'm doing it in respect for the tradition that I've been asked to do this by my teachers, whom I love and respect. So there's my number one, why I would cover my head. Number two, I've really gotten to like it, and it feels nice to have that extra layer over the crown of my head. And number three, I'm been told by my teachers it helps to contain the energy. I love to, even if I'm just meditating, slip a shawl or a scarf over my head. It feels cozy. It feels more contained. So that's what I could say, from my own personal experience.
That's great. And then you mentioned a word that I wanted to bring up, which is Sikhism. Where is the line where that begins and Kundalini ends? And can you tell listeners what's the language that they're chanting when they're chanting in Kundalini Yoga? And obviously people have a range of different religious beliefs, and I think this can also be a barrier for people. So I want us to talk about this.
Yes, yes, exactly. Well, Yogi Bhajan was a Sikh man. So he, the style of the dress of the Sikhs is to wear the traditional Indian clothing. They don't cut their hair. They wear turbans, and there's a lot of other things, specific things to the Sikh religion that they do. The mantras that we, and so just to continue on that thought. So a lot of Yogi Bhajans, I would call them immediate students. They emulated their teacher, whom they loved so much, and they took on every aspect of his lifestyle and his teachings. They were intent on embodying, which is a very beautiful thing. When it comes to the mantras that we chant in Kundalini Yoga, they come from the Sanskrit language, but they're written in what is called Gurumukhi, which is an offshoot, if you like, of Sanskrit. It's a certain script that's very precise. So the specific way that the mantras are chanted has been really preserved because of that. And the mantras primarily come from Guru Nanak, who was the very first of the Sikh gurus. Before it was a religion, he was around in a time in India when the Muslims and the Hindus were fighting aggressively, and he was a very enlightened man from a very young age, and he chose to walk through life kind of dressed as half Muslim and half Hindu, and really just sing the praises of, as it says in Kundalini Yoga, Ekonkar, all of creation and creator are one. We are all created from that same divine essence. So he sang the songs of oneness. And it is said, he had his moment of awakening, and he poured out this poem, which is called Japji, which is about 46 stanzas, which really encapsulates the experience of living here on this earth in these bodies. And it's called the meditation of the soul. Many of the mantras come from that. That was an utterance that came from Guru Nanak in a very enlightened state. So it's believed that therefore when you chant these mantras, you are drawing yourself to that same vibration that he was in as he uttered those mantras. So in other words, the sound itself helps to clarify your consciousness and elevate you to a different space. So they're really sound prescriptions. And that came down then through the different Sikh gurus who were all enlightened masters in their own right. And later it became a religion. But before that, it was a way of life. And Sikh really means seeker in this sense. So they were a dedicated path of seekers. Yogi Bhajan understood the power and the precision of these mantras that were coming from this tradition. And so he shared them within the practices because he understood the precision of the sound and how that sound impacts us. And you just have to start looking around now at the research that's coming out on how sound is impacting us on all dimensions of our being to understand the power of it. So that is a little bit, in a very distilled form of what we're doing. So when you're chanting a mantra, think of it, this predates the religion of Sikhism. This is about connecting to a sound current. And that's what Guru Nanak was sharing, that when we chant and repeat these sounds, we start to elevate our consciousness. We start to shift the patterns of our mind. We start to awaken to different states. So treat them as just little sound formulas, if you can, and not of the more sort of dogmatic and religious approach that Sikhism has become.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I like to remind people that there's actually all these pressure points in your mouth. So you can even think of these as like little recipes, healing recipes that, just you're stimulating either the soft palate or the space right behind your teeth in a certain way, and that's actually affecting you on a physical level. So just exactly like you said, you don't have to get caught up in the exact meaning, and you can even just think of it as just almost like a vocal exercise that's incredibly healing.
Absolutely. And again, just remembering that the yogic practices, the yoga tradition predates religion. It is a practice of living in balance within ourselves and with the world around us. You can be of any religion and faith and still practice this yoga and connect it back to your understanding of God, of the divine, of higher self, whatever your perception of that is. So it's not about replacing anything. It's just about accessing a practice that can help you to connect more deeply spiritually, whatever your path is.
Beautiful. And to wrap up, I want you to tell us about Radiant Body Yoga and how you developed it, because those of us that are familiar with Kundalini, or listeners that are familiar, one of the things, and one of the first things I feel like I remember really learning and understanding about Kundalini is that it's prescriptive, right? And you can't change the Kriyas, and there's a lot of rules, and you have to respect the tradition. And one of the things I've so admired about you is that you respect the tradition, but you have this this your own hybrid where you've pulled Kundalini and Ashtanga and Iyengar and everything together. And just tell us about that and how you came to do this and let listeners know more about exactly what it is that you're offering.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I came to yoga through a very physical practice, Ashtanga yoga, and I really needed it to get grounded in my body and to be present in years. So the physical practice was really healing for me. Ashtanga, then later Vinyasa, back to Ashtanga. And so I've always had a deep love of that level of physical practice. I find it so healing and grounding. And then I came into Kundalini Yoga and I found it very cleansing, purifying, elevating. But if I did just Kundalini Yoga, I got too spaced out. I wasn't grounded in my body enough. And so I started to do my Ashtanga practice and then do a Kriya and meditation. And so it kind of grew out of that. So I use my Ashtanga and Vinyasa background as a way to warm the body up and get really grounded and rooted. I might look at the positions in the Kriya, in the sequence, and figure out what I need to open up in the body so I can really access that Kriya at a much deeper level. So I do the prescribed Kriya and then a pranayama meditation after that. And I've just found in my own experience that has been such a healing formula. And when I look at the people who come to class and really what we as modern practitioners need, I really understand that if you're sitting at a desk for most of your day and you can perhaps spare the 90 minutes for a yoga class, you kind of need to get everything in that 90 minutes. If all you're going to do is kind of sit and breathe and chant and stuff, that's great. But then what happens to your physical body and the fact that you've been sitting all day and you haven't really gotten to get into it, so to speak. So I wanted also to be sharing a practice that if you've been sitting all day, there's enough movement at the beginning, like big movement, like Surya Namaskaras, and standing poses that get you fully into every one of the major muscle groups in your body, really open up the joints and the tissues and the nadis, the energy channels, so that by the time you get to this specific formula, you're really ready. And then the subtlety of the formula can work its magic on you, and you're ready to embody it at a different level. So that's where Radiant Body Yoga came from. And I was just guided by my mentors, those that I really trusted and loved. And I have deep, deep respect for Yogi Bhajan and all of those teachers who hold true to the tradition. And I hold myself to a high standard of integrity, and I want to share the Kriyas as I was taught to share them. And so that's my dance. I use the first part of practice to get people in. Then I share the practice as I've been taught to, which is their sublime. And then, we draw toward a meditative state, and then hopefully stillness after that, pure stillness. So everything that I'm doing is informed by all of my own direct experience and the guidance of, the master teachers around me. And I do feel like it's a practice that can meet us where we're at this time.
It's such a magical experience, the way that Kia combines the Vinyasa or Ashtanga at the beginning and then the Kundalini and the deep meditation. So I really encourage listeners to explore her work and connect with her, which leads us to my next question, Kia, which is how can people best find you, connect with you online, study with you? What do you have coming up? How can listeners stay in touch?
Well, I have almost 200 classes on Yoga Glo, Yoga GLO. So you can practice with me online. 2 weeks for free, I think $18 a month after that. So that's kind of an easy access point. And then what I love to do is take people through immersive experiences, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of that poke, provoke, confront. And so I like to get people for, 3 days, 5 days, 6 days, 2 weeks, to go through these practices in a way where they feel supported, connected to other people doing it, and in a way where you can really start to transmute through those layers and access in a short period of time a new level of clarity to yourself and, your sense of purpose and why you're here. And so I offer, you can see them all on my website, kiamiller.com. If you go under events, you'll see all my different events. So I offer these immersive experiences, and then I developed a 200-hour and a 300-hour program. The 200-hour, it was always begging to come through me. And then the 300-hour, there's 6-day modules where I go in depth into certain topics, like, for example, prana and pranayama, understanding energy, how it's working, how to direct it, etc. And then, understanding mantra. Why do these sound currents work? How do they work? Where is their origin? What is their origin? And meditation in the mind, looking at the model of the mind from the yogic perspective, which is brilliant. And once you understand the model of how the mind is working, then you can start to make your mind your friend. And that's when life starts to get interesting at a whole other level. So there's a couple more. I have 5 of those. And I designed them originally as immersions, and then students asked if I would do a 300-hour, so I made them into that. But you could do them just for your pleasure or to get, credits in the Radiant Body Yoga School. And then I'm at different retreats and conferences and festivals, and those are great opportunities to come and just taste the practice. Often in those settings, I have musicians with me who really understand the mantra portion. In fact, I have 2 coming with me to India in early November. We're doing the mantra and the yoga of sound course, and they're playing live in class. And their deep understanding of the practice and the mantra adds a whole other element of subtle transformation and inspiration for those who come. So that's the kind of stuff I'm interested in. It thrills me to see somebody's lights starting to turn on inside, and that kind of the confidence and the inspiration and the presence that is awakened in people through these practices. And so yeah, that's my journey. Please connect with me in any one of those ways. And I'm available through my website. If people have questions, you just email me through my website. I might not get to you right away, but I get to you eventually.
Wonderful. So we're going to put the link to Kia's website right in the description below the podcast. So be sure to check it out and connect with her. And listeners, I would really love to hear what you thought of today's episode. There's a couple ways you can do that. You can head on over to our private Facebook group, which is savanaeast.com/group. It's going to redirect you to the private Facebook community, and we can approve you as a member. And of course, we're desperately excited to hear your rating or review here on iTunes and to know more about what you thought about this conversation, your own personal experience with Kundalini Yoga. Are you a savvy Kundalini practitioner already, or has this ignited some curiosity for you? I would really love to hear from you below this episode. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Make sure to connect with yourself, do yoga, slow down. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the very end, and I will talk to you and see you next week. So much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana Podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to savanaspirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at facebook.com/SivanaSpirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at sivanaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana Podcast.